Hello, my name's Jackie Grisdale and I'm the Youth Marketing Strategist at SMRS. Today's webinar is a little bit of a follow-up from a session that I did at the Early Careers Conference a couple of weeks ago. And what we're going to be doing is taking a bit of a whistle-stop tour around youth marketing, having a look at what's worked in the past, what works now, what's changed, and what hasn't when it comes to student recruitment marketing. So thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I hope you're going to find this session useful and informative. And please do feel free to drop me a line after the event if you want to speak to me in more detail about anything that we cover today. So for those of you who don't know as well, SMRS are specialists in youth marketing. We provide audience insight and understanding, strategic consultancy, youth branding and attraction activity. And I joined the team earlier this year, in the first time I've worked agency side, and I've been working across a range of clients since I've joined, not only with a national focus, but also those organisations with a global focus too, and those who are attracting school and college and university leavers for their opportunities. Prior to that, I led the student recruitment team at a large professional membership organisation called ICAW, for any of you who may have heard of them. And I've got extensive experience in everything from that face-to-face engagement activity through to print and digital marketing campaigns, online competitions, and right the way from that kind of tactical level, being out there talking to students at careers fairs and presentations, right the way through to that kind of strategic level, thinking around kind of where we're going, what universities, schools, colleges to target, and what activity we're really going to deliver. So let's kick off by getting back to basics. When it comes to student recruitment, resourcing teams traditionally place their focus on recruitment first, and that's quite rightly so. They'll deliver activity purely to drive applications, and that's through a range of different attraction activity. And as suggested by the size of the circles, this is generally the priority for some and their only focus. But in recent years, there has been a shift. There's been a growing focus on the importance of and development of employer brands. Employers that can effectively define and communicate their value proposition and their culture effectively will attract candidates on a deeper level. Those candidates who have values that align to the business, those candidates who will not only stay longer, driving down attrition, but actually who are more productive, better advocates, and those that provide a better customer experience to customers at the very end of the process as well. And then for the really advanced employers out there, especially in this kind of volume recruitment space, they will actually give a concern to the candidate experience as well. But as you can see, as represented by those circles, it's clearly a disproportionate amount of focus from that recruitment piece, driving those applications through to candidate experience perhaps being a lesser focus for organisations. And it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't actually work for today's youth market. Gen Z, as we most commonly refer to them, basically, to be really successful when it comes to that future talent attraction piece, you actually need to focus on three core areas as we see it. That youth branding piece, attraction activity, and then also the customer experience as a fundamental element. And you need to focus on all of them in equal measure. But in reality, what we'll see, as I've already mentioned, is that many of our clients are just focusing on one area, and often that's to the detriment of others. So what I'm going to do as we go through the webinar is I'll cover off each of these in a little bit more detail. But first of all, let's start off with a little bit of audience understanding. So originally I was asked to talk around kind of generations and generational change. So it was a really quick leveler. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to understanding who we're talking about when using some of the kind of terminology, that kind of baby boomer, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, etc. So here you can see them segmented based on their year of birth. And it's kind of fairly standard terminology that's used to describe them. But just as a word of note, depending on different texts you're looking at, some of the kind of precise years may vary a little bit. But when we're talking about generations, especially in the press, it often comes with all those headlines that hold descriptors at us, and they make sweeping statements about the whole generation. So when they talk about baby boomers, they'll talk about people who are respectful and work-centric, that who are well-educated and community-orientated, ethical, and perhaps preferring a more hierarchical approach to management. And they've had it really tough, and these millennials nowadays, they've got it easy. And then when we're talking about millennials, they'll refer to them as being really tech savvy and materialistic and selfish, and even lazy and arrogant, and that we all want ping pong tables and comfy sofas at work and drink takeaway coffee and eat avocados. Well, to be honest, I fall into this bracket and I hate avocados. So I don't think sometimes that actually using the kind of generational segmentation works, because fundamentally I don't think the generations are often all that different. People are just at different stages of their lives experiencing the exact same issues and challenges that the youth have done beforehand, but ultimately just with a different environment, and that's what then starts to shape some of those attitudes and behaviours. So people say that the current youth are more likely to protest and boycott a product if it doesn't align with their values, for example. But actually, that isn't the case. And I've seen some research recently that shows that at the exact same age, previous generations are just as likely to protest or boycott or decide not to choose a product or organisation that doesn't align with their values. But we do just tend to hear about it more now. So news is filtered throughout our day. You can't get through a day without hearing the news, seeing it on an app or social media. And social media allows a bigger share of voice and connects people more globally based on their passions and motivations and beliefs. Really, really powerful. And as you know, you hear about things much more frequently because of it. And then it comes to Gen Z. And if I were to generalize, these are the kind of core attributes of today's youth, as I see it. And many of the descriptors that you'll hear about Gen Z can be, really negative, actually, and I hate that. I actually think there's a lot more positives to be brought to the workforce by those entering into the workforce right now, and the generations beforehand, come to think of it. And we need to carefully manage and cultivate that. Their agility, for example, is a really great example of something as employers we can leverage, especially when it comes to the changing world of work. They actually won't necessarily seek that long-term commitment in the same way that perhaps previous generations, baby boomers, for instance, would have done. They've got side hustles going on. They're really, really well connected. They're not going to necessarily expect that kind of linear career path either. So they'll be increasingly thinking of perhaps moving laterally into specialist roles as well. And this is actually really, really helpful when it comes to kind of organisational structures, and which will perhaps starting to see them flatten in the future. They're great problem solvers, really entrepreneurial, and if they spot a problem, they'll or a gap, they'll look to fix it. They'll invent something that they're innovative. They'll think of something of their own. They're really connected, so they don't just seek sort of local opinion. They look at it on a global level as well, and they can kind of access diversity of thought much more easily than we perhaps have been able to in previous generations. They're really agile, they embrace change, they seek out opportunities, really efficient, and some people will categorize this as impatient, but ultimately they're going to search out and find those answers and solve problems themselves. They might become bored or frustrated by red tape, but actually as organizations, I think we can use that in quite a positive way as well. And that whole values-led piece, they want their values to align, and they want to make an impact. They will get behind a cause, youth generally, not just Gen Z. So why not harness that as you bring new future talent into the workspace, get them behind those initiatives where you're trying to drive change within the business. And the reason why I've got the picture of the girl kind of going out of her mind here is that really I get a bit frustrated by some of these generational descriptors. I think they're a bit lazy. They're purely demographic and really only one dimensional. It means that we're treating these large cohorts of students as one homogenous group, and it's not really recognising or allowing for the nuances that are inevitably part of youth culture, or any culture, you know, in fact. So when we start to look at kind of student audiences, my recommendation is really to further segment. So yes, we're talking about that kind of future talent and early careers space, but now how do we segment that down, that audience based on kind of drivers, motivations, passions, and maybe recognise that not everyone's going to be the same, because different segments of Gen Z and that particular audience will always be different depending on perhaps where they've grown up, their kind of family background, or their socioeconomic background, for instance, and there'll be nuances that are caused because of that. So it's vital, if you want to be successful when it comes to youth marketing, to really understand the different segments of that particular audience, and really consider who you're trying to appeal to, and really get to know their culture and their motivations and values, and what's going to resonate with them. That way you can really build an authentic and meaningful youth brand that's going to communicate with your youth audience on their level. So, as a bit of a summary slide, yes, it's important to tailor your employer brand for the youth market, so that you have a brand relevant for the youth market that speaks to and aligns with your desired audience and the people that you're looking to attract for your opportunities. The same messages aren't necessarily going to work for everyone. And yes, ethics are important, but the priority might be different from one segment of an audience to another. So thinking in a practical way, if you're thinking about those who are interested in kind of IT or digital computer science type roles, we often hear that work-life balance is really important to Gen Z. And yes, it is, but actually that particular segment are much more interested in things like the innovation that's within the organization, and that culture of innovation and change. So actually, when you're looking to appeal to them, messages around that aspect and that part of your value proposition will resonate much more strongly than those perhaps interested in more of the kind of general business related roles. And for students embarking on their first step into the world of work, they're going to be really incredibly focused on the role as it is now. They want to understand in a more immediate way what work they're going to be doing, and what that will mean for them, and kind of the impact that they're going to have, so that they can see what their life is going to be like in the next year, 2 years, in a more immediate way. So whilst they are definitely interested in development and training and progression, we see that amongst all of the research that's out there, and that still needs to be clearly communicated. What they really want to know is what's that going to be like for them on a day-to-day basis. What's the reality of that culture, and how's it going to feel when they join you in 6 months' time, perhaps. And then that final point on there, be honest, be authentic. Authenticity is a massive buzzword with the youth market and Gen Z. Don't forget, they gather information from a huge wide range of different resources. So they can get the lowdown on your organisation from the likes of Glassdoor and Rate My Placement, Rate My Apprenticeship. So ensuring that you've got advocates within your business is really, really important as well. And I did promise you a little bit of a future focus. So don't forget, Gen Alpha's on the horizon, and they're reaching that kind of 9-10 years old already. So actually they're already starting to form their opinions of whether they might pursue higher education, or what kind of sectors they do or don't think they might work in the future. So if you can establish a really strong youth brand now, you can actually, that's really relevant for young people, you're going to continue to reap the rewards when it comes to future talent pipeline in kind of 5 or 10 years time. So that's a bit of a summary of that kind of youth branding piece, and knowing who we're wanting to attract. So the natural next step is thinking about talent attraction and how we're going to attract them. just look at all of the things that can be considered a part of that modern day future talent campaign. You've got lead generation, performance, direct mail, experiential, paid, owned, earned, biddable. It's really, really broad in terms of that definition of what falls in that talent attraction activity. But actually, it hasn't always been this way. Back in the day, it was a bit of a different process. And for a bit of fun, I actually thought I'd do a little bit of research, see what the kind of cold hard numbers were in relation to kind of what was going on in the student recruitment attraction activity space. So I took off my rose tinted glasses and had a look at some of the stats and data out there. So as you can see, progressing through 2002 to 2009, 70% of AGR, which is now the ISE, the AGR's members were using the internet to receive applications. I think it's probably the vast majority now. Just under 70% were using dedicated recruitment websites. And one of the stats that I thought was really interesting, that only 22 were targeting based on gender. And there was actually a statement within that particular report where they were suggesting that the majority of employers didn't feel like there was a challenge when it came to diversity in terms of gender. 12 universities visited on average in 2005. Promo gifts were all the rage. I remember packing up boxes and boxes of mints and colourful highlighters, those flower ones, back in the day. 23k was the average spend on recruitment advertising. We're talking paper-based advertising then. Tiny percentages of people's budget being spent on websites and email services, and a whopping 3.1 million spent on careers fairs. As we moved into 2009, employers were starting to reach out to more universities, and they were starting to engage more with those careers advisors, and shifting budget towards that kind of online promotion as well. So you can see that the increasing amount of money and volume in terms of percentages of people using those online channels. And then as we shift through into 2019, again, a further increase in the number of universities targeted, more and more using external job boards, but 58% are still saying that visits to university is the most effective activity. So despite the increase in all that digital marketing, that nothing beats face-to-face. And increasing numbers of employers using campus ambassadors. So really moving into using kind of more advocates when it comes to that student recruitment activity. Loads of people still using printed materials, but a tiny proportion finding it the most effective channel. And then a whopping 88% using social media marketing, and as a kind of fundamental part of that kind of attraction campaign. And talking about social media, I've just pulled out some slides with some stats in about kind of the use there. So you can see 3 hours a day on social media, probably more for a good number. 75% are using Instagram, 36% turning to LinkedIn. Social media, just nearly 80% of Gen Z are saying that they receive their news via social media. Messenger apps are all the rage as well. And you can see the growth in users as well. So growing from that kind of 8-10 million people across those kind of key social media spaces back in 2007 and 2012, through to the staggering volume of people using all of the different channels now. And TikTok, a new kid on the block when it comes to social media. Don't know about anybody else. I've downloaded it. I'm kind of still adjusting to how that works, but very interesting to see some of the content on there as well. But what's really struck me is that actually, I'm not sure that it's changed all that much. Some of those tried and tested methodologies are still massively in use, but the biggest shift, of course, has been the use of technology. All of that digital marketing and activity allows us to be hyper targeted and tailored in terms of who we're reaching, and much more use of personalization. It's a complete no-brainer. But actually, if I'm being honest, I don't know whether we're changing our strategies enough. It is a really competitive market out there, but still, there's so few employers that are using and really using the cold hard data that they get from their marketing activities to inform what they're doing, and actually perhaps not leveraging tech out there enough to reach the talent that they're looking for. So I've delivered some kind of virtual careers fairs and digital events over the very recent years. I think they're a great way to extend reach, but really I think they're still in very limited use. Starting to see more VR and AR technology used out on campus, but again, still quite small in comparison to, you know, the availability of that technology, and it's not always as cost prohibitive as you might think. Some of the third parties out there are getting better at kind of collecting that behavioural data from their websites, tracking what students are doing and then serving up content to them dynamically based on the kind of interests that they've registered and that they've tracked through their sites. But I don't know whether that's necessarily being used to its kind of fullest and best effect. So in summary, multi-channel does matter. I'm a huge advocate of face-to-face activity, but I do think we need to think about the journey and what we're doing and when, making sure that we're giving the right message, the right people at the right time, but delivered in a way that they want to receive it, not just what's best for our internal and system requirements. So I think there's a real opportunity for employers to improve candidate experience and by leveraging data and technology more in the attraction space and using data to inform what they do and using tech to break down barriers. And then for the future, technology is only going to help actually, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon for sure. But I do think there is a balance that needs to be struck. I think we always need to remember to keep it personal, make sure we're being accessible, making it easy for students, finding, you know, using it to help us find the right talent and keep them engaged, and making sure that we continue to show them how they're going to make a difference once they're in our organisation or part of our membership organisation, and fundamentally use all of that data and insight to move them along that decision making journey, thinking about what we're saying and doing and when. And then my final point, that customer experience piece, and customer, because ultimately probably 95% of the people you're coming into contact with aren't ever going to be a candidate. They're going to get rejected as well. But what we need to make sure that we do is that we've done all of that hard work in developing the brand and finding who we want and attracting them. We just don't want to ruin it all with a rubbish experience. So when it comes to that experience piece, it's joining the dots between the perception of your brand and hopefully your youth brand once you've developed it, and making sure that it really aligns with the actual experience of the interaction that you're giving to the student, so that meets. Because where there's that expectation gap, that's where there's poor experience. Easy, isn't it? Just make it amazing, simple. But we all know the reality is that's easier said than done. So when thinking about how to make that experience an amazing one, you know, start off by, as I've already said, knowing your customer. Use your internal data, segment the data that you've got, have a look at who's successful, who you've got coming into the top of the funnel, and therefore knowing whether you need to broaden your attraction activity to get more of them to convert them, or is it looking at the process and how they're transitioning through. But make sure you're combining that with shared and market data, so you're benchmarking your activity and how you're performing with others, and that will help you identify what's going on there as well. Make sure you understand the persona of your different audience segments, and there's no, you know, have several different personas for the different type of people you're trying to attract, and really understand what their drivers and their motivators are, and their media and you know, their media consumption and their habits, and what their information needs are. That might be slightly different depending on the people you're looking to attract. And then understand their journey, map it out, get a huge, great big wall, and really kind of look at all of those different touch points that somebody could have with your organization, or map out all of that process. And it'll be a really complex picture, and there's multiple touch points, as we all know, along the way, but really understand that process that people are going through, and identify the moments that matter. Identify where you're perhaps going to lose candidates, where they're going to withdraw. Is it that it's just a really lengthy process and you need to keep more communications there to kind of nurture them along that conversion strategy? Is this something that's happening that means you're just turning them off and therefore you're losing them to other competitors? So think about ways in, you know, how you reduce the risk of kind of losing people. Is it maybe just that you're not giving them access to real people who can give them a true insight, or that you're not taking care to give them personalized feedback? So don't forget, it is a two-way street, and then improve it. I know it sounds easy, but just make small tweaks and changes, to give them a better experience. Just think about what a difference a positive experience can make in terms of your attrition through the process. You know, we've got loads of stats and data points out there to show how much more loyal people are, how much more they're likely to advocate for you. So just think about how the technology can help and you to manage candidates, improve response times, give them good feedback, make it personal, make it relevant for the individual, and ultimately you'll help their decision-making process and hopefully convince them to choose you rather than a competitor when it comes to making that all-important career decision. So as a summary, make sure you understand your objectives, who you're looking to attract. Make sure you're developing a youth brand that matters to them. Make sure you're thinking about the candidate or the customer first, and it's not all about your wants and your needs. Yes, you do have opportunities to fill, but do be kind of customer centric when thinking about it. Don't just hurl information at them. Think about their information needs and the stage that they're at along the journey, and if the intervention that you're delivering aligns with that as well. But most of all, be bold, have a go, try things out, test, use data to inform kind of what you're doing and help show whether what you're doing is the right thing. Make sure you're just looking and using and analysing that information in the right way. So that's it. That concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful. And as I say, if you've got any questions at all, my email address is there on the screen in front of you. Can give me a call, link in with me. So use whatever channel is best for you to get in touch. And thank you very much. Goodbye.